Thank you for tuning in to the Practical Preservation Podcast. Please take a moment to visit our website, practicalpreservationservices.com, for additional information and tips to help you restore your historical home. If you've not done so, please subscribe to us on iTunes, Stitcher, or SoundCloud, and also like us on Facebook. Welcome to the Practical Preservation Podcast, hosted by Danielle and Jonathan Kepperling. Kepperling Preservation Services is a family-owned business based in Lancaster, Pennsylvania, dedicated to the preservation of our built architectural history for today's use as well as future generations. Our weekly podcast provides you with expert advice specific to the unique needs of renovating a historic home, educating by sharing our From the Trenches preservation knowledge and our guests' expertise, balancing modern needs while maintaining the historical significance, character, and beauty of your period home.
Today on the Practical Preservation Podcast, we have Alice French and Sam McKelvey with us from the from the Menokin Foundation. Is it the foundation organization?
Foundation's good.
Foundation, yeah. Okay. So talk to us about an interesting project that they have. So I'll let you guys can decide who goes first. Tell me a little bit about your backgrounds.
Well, this is Sam. I've always been a historic preservation, geography junkie most of my life. I grew up born in the Midwest, but moved to the East Coast when I was about 10 years old, and have been kind of living in the Eastern Seaboard for most of my life, and grew up with obviously some rich history around me. So my parents were always history and landscape environmental enthusiasts. So going out and being a part of that every chance I can get was important to me. So it made natural sense for me to go to college kind of seeking that out. And so I went to James Madison University, got my geography degree originally. And so that was originally what I was interested in doing, and decided after I had graduated that necessarily wasn't the right fit for me. So I eventually went back, much to the chagrin of my parents, back to school to receive my double major into history. And that kind of launched my career in history. And museums are always a part of what I wanted to do, and historic preservation was always an important aspect of that. So just kind of rose through the museum field, doing visitor services work at first, collections experience, and then eventually working in a museum where all the full-time staff left above me. Yeah, so just like many museum professionals, kind of the right fit, the right time came along, and was able to get my first management job at a museum because I was really the only one left there to do it. And that's how I fell in love with managing museums, and it's a passion of mine, and found that was lucky to get here to Menokin just 4 years ago in 2016, and have been loving it ever since.
Very good. Thank you.
And for me, I sort of came about this whole field in a kind of circuitous way. I started out in the arts and in design. I worked as my early jobs as a draftsman, and I worked in the interior design field for a long time. But I went back to school late and got a degree in sculpture. But I married an architect, and so I've always had a big interest in architecture. And then I relocated to Virginia, and began working in the museum field with a history museum. And that really opened up a lot of things about local history and other interests. And when I was recruited for Menokin, that was really an amazing, for me, sort of joining of all my interests together in one place, this wonderful, unique architecture project, along with sort of some of these explorations with the crafts and arts to tell these stories. And I've really just think that it's got a lot of magic, and we're still digging that stuff up around us. Yeah. And it's just a really interesting place to be for me.
Okay, very good. And I think that both of you kind of talked about or touched about it, but was there a reason why you were drawn to history or preservation?
Yeah, for me, I've always loved storytelling. That was an important part of my life. I was always enthused with stories and imagination, but when it was a storytelling that was real and part of our background, it became that much more interesting to me. So it became a passion of mine just to hear the story of the people that came before me that really had relevance to who I am and the community around us today. Always been passionate about that, and what history and museums and preservation can do for a community, giving back that kind of thread of their beginnings and the foundings, and just having that interesting story. I taught, actually didn't even tell you this, Danielle, that I taught at school for a year at a small private school. And one of the things I used to tell my students is that, history is just about a story, and it's just finding the right story for you. And so I think it's more part of our lives than I think what most people know, and it's certainly been part of my life.
I agree.
And I think I also was just interested, I've always been interested in building and old buildings, and there's that sort of love of the ruin, and just multiple layers that come from it. And like Sam said too, I think feeling like to be able to, to understand that we have more. It's not just a building too; it's the whole place. We're telling the story of the identity of a place, and then the people who lived there and made that place their home, and why, and all that stuff gets brought together. And it just to tell an amazing story that's about the past, I think. But why we care about that still today. Why is it important to remember the past? Because we learned so much from that, and we have many truths to learn from that, I think. So I think it's just a great place to be.
I agree. And I think when we're studying history, we start to realize too that people haven't changed that much. Our technology has changed, but people are the same.
Yeah.
And I think that helps too, is that we're not that different. And the things that are going on in our lives, and there's many things that we're talking about as a community today in our communities that there's a lot of parallels. And I think just understanding that gives you a grounding that things are not so out of control at times.
Right. I agree with you. So tell me the history of the Menokin Foundation, the Francis Lightfoot Lee House. I don't know how that all fits together, so you can kind of help me with that.
Sure. Menokin, I guess we'll start off way back. Menokin is an Algonquin word. It's a Rappahannock, which was the language of the Rappahannock tribe, which settled the area long ago and has been part of it and still part of it today. That's where the name came from, and that we don't really know what the word means. The Rappahannocks today do not know the direct definition of the word, but it was used to describe the landscape around us, the hills, the rivers, the streams, the landscape itself. So that was what the area was called all along, and it was still called that when we had our first colonial European settlers in the area. We know that the property was first used as a plantation around the early 18th century by the Grimes family. We know at that time that there was slave quarters, enslaved laborers working on the side as a tobacco plantation. Really began the landscape was really profitable by the later 18th century when the Taylor family owned it, and they've operated as a satellite farm of the larger Mount Airy plantation. It was still called Menokin at that time, so they picked the landscape name up from the Algonquin word from the Rappahannocks at that point. And it wasn't, though, until 1797 when a major manor house, the large house that we know as the ruin today, was built.
1769.
1797. Sorry. A lot of dates in my head. 1769. Thank you, Alice. 1769 when the house was built. And it was built after the marriage of Rebecca Taylor, one of the daughters of John Taylor II, who owned Mount Airy, to Francis Lightfoot Lee. And they married, and this is the Lee family, the famous Lee family of Virginia, a distant cousin of the Robert E. Lee that many people know. But Francis Lightfoot Lee would be very instrumental in early colonial government. He would be a member of the Second Continental Congress. He'd go on to sign the Declaration of Independence. So he's one of 7 Virginians to sign the Declaration of Independence. along with his brother, Richard Henry Lee. And so he became very well known for that. He retired from politics while the war was still happening, the Revolutionary War, settled back at Menokin in the late 1770s, and would live quietly there with his wife, Rebecca, until 1797. There's that date, when he and his wife would pass away within 10 days of each other in 1797. And after that point, the house went back to the Taylors and went through a number of different families through the plantation era. And then we know at that time that several hundred enslaved laborers lived on the site in clusters of slave cabins throughout the location. We'll talk more about that later, I'm sure, about their part in Menokin, which really is the main part of Menokin. And eventually, the house at post-Civil War lost its viability and eventually began to lost a lot of prosperity. And then the owners of the homes by the 20th century could no longer take care of the property. The Alejandro family, owned in the 1930s, no longer live there. And you eventually began seeing kind of a demolition by neglect at that point in time, where the environment around it began to encroach. And eventually the trees began springing through what was left of the house, the ruin. And eventually a tree fell through the roof portion in 1969, and then really accelerated the deterioration of the home. So it was at that point, during all this time, preservationists were very keen on trying to save the property, but nothing was really done until 1995, when finally an agreement was made between the Alejandro family and the brand new Menokin Foundation to take control in 1995.
And I did think it was interesting when I was on the website doing some research before the podcast, that they went in and took all the woodwork out to salvage it, and that's really fortunate for you. But that they had foresight there. They did.
The Alejandros definitely knew what the house was,
Mm-hmm.
and definitely had concerns about it. It wasn't something that they didn't care about. They just couldn't financially take care of the property. But they did, yes, they were aware that the house was open and vacant. And so in the late 1960s, prior to that tree coming down on the house, they did remove all of the interior woodwork and preserve it. And actually, there's a great story about that, that they removed it, but many of the preservationists had knew about the house, was not aware that it was removed and preserved. And so several decades went by, and there was an assumption that the house was vandalized and robbed.
And like stripped, yeah.
And so it was a great relief that we heard in 1995 during the negotiations for the property that the Alejandro family had luckily preserved all of it. So it became part of the gift to Menokin, the Menokin Foundation, 1995, is to receive all that great woodwork.
Yes.
Still preserved.
Yeah, very good. Did you have anything that you wanted to add, Alice?
I think he's covered the timeline. And so since then, we've been kind of a research center until recently, become more of an active place with our building project beginning. So,
okay, well, very good. And well, that's kind of a nice segue into the project. And I'm not sure where you are, if you're still like in the fundraising phase, like the kind of the conceptual. I know that you protected it with a steel canopy, which I think is really smart, to stop the water from being able to get in. I mean, any building, whether it's it being neglected and then trying to have this intervention, or any building needs a roof. So I think that's the right first step. So, and then you're working on a structural glass portion. Has that started, or is it still pretty conceptual?
Right. So yeah, we, as you said, 1995 was the beginning of Menokin holding ownership of the property. And really in those first 15 years, it was just emergency procedures. As you said, it's an open roof, whatever we can do. The environment was taking control of the property. So the early founders did everything they could to kind of slow down that deterioration. Mm-hmm. And one of those things that they did was get a grant from state of Virginia to put up this large overstructure, which a lot of people have seen before. Even if they don't know it's Menokin, they kind of know that ruin with a giant overstructure over the top, which slows down the deterioration, keeping the wind and some of the rain off of it. There is some negatives with it as well, not to get too technical, but those historic homes are meant to kind of breathe and be a part of the environment. So it kind of creates an artificial environment inside, which does cause some other problems as well. But for the most part, I think that it's better to have it than not.
Right.
But yeah, that's what we did in the early years to kind of slow the deterioration. But during this time, they're always trying to think about what to do next. And it was during this period that they knew that they had to be thinking long term. What does this house mean? What is it? What's important about it? Do we want to do a full scale reconstruction? And the answer to that last question was a definitive no. There's a lot of historic homes in Virginia, a lot of colonial historic homes, a lot of dignitary, rich, white plantation owner historic homes in Virginia. Mm-hmm. And it was deemed that there was not enough of a reason just to do another one of those by itself. Right. And the real interest was, of course, the story of the people who live there, but of also the architecture itself. I mean, it's an amazing architecture. We had an opportunity with the house, the way in the state it was, to be able to really see almost as an X-ray vision of a colonial home. Its parts and pieces in a deconstructed way that we could see mechanically how these things were built with all the original materials. It had not been updated since the beginning of late 19th century. So it was a kind of a colonial home stuck in time, which fascinated a lot of architects, historians. Right. But it also allowed us to see those building components that were actually literally touched by the people who built it and created it and dreamt of its creation.
Yeah, because you don't see the interior of a wall.
Right.
Usually. I mean, you can explain, how thick a brick wall is or how thick a stone wall is, but you visually don't see that unless you watch somebody, lay it from the ground up. And that's very unusual, to be able to see now.
It is. And I think we wanted to keep that component. But the problem is always, it's a ruin. And the definition for ruin is that those things continue to deteriorate. Mm-hmm. So we had to enclose it somehow. And this is where the glass house concept came to be, is that we needed to enclose it to protect the ruin from any further deterioration. But we didn't want to enclose it to hide all the original elements of the home. Right. So that's where this glass house concept, which puts in the original location, the original walls and roof sections with glass and steel. So you can see behind it and through it and still bring in the environment from which it's made into the ruin itself. So that's another component you don't get a lot when you're in a historic home surrounded by four walls, is that these things are made from nature and in the landscape around it, and really built on the idea of what that plantation would look like in a geometric, and really a social economic way as well. So there's a lot of factors that benefit us from putting glass up instead.
Well, and that's very much we weren't building walls like that until the mid-century modern. And that's very much the mid-century modern concept of, bringing nature inside, like, so that you're kind of, it's like And so I can see talking about the natural, I can see that when you said that, it made sense to me from a design standpoint. So have you begun construction on this, or is it in the design phase?
So we've begun construction. We started the full campaign in 2015 to create this. And we believed that it was best for the project to begin really working on it as money was coming in. Right. So that first year was getting the architectural drawings and everything down, making sure that we brought in the best talent. We have Machado Savetti, which is an international architectural firm, working on it out of Boston, and we have Consigli Construction and their all their contractors, which is another large construction firm. Mm-hmm. So we wanted the best of the best to work on it. Plus, we had advisory councils of historic preservation minds from across the nation to work on this as well. So we wanted to make sure it made sense, was ethical, and was sensitive to the historic property itself. And so we began those drawings in 2015, began what we call a mock corner, stabilization of one of those corners. Mm-hmm. We have to stabilize the existing stones up to the water table of the home before you really support the glass and steel.
That makes sense, yeah.
So we did that in 2015, did another corner in 2017, and really launched the major phase of stabilization of the existing masonry this year. And so we've been doing that work at Menokin, which is open construction. It's an open park environment since March, and you can see that when you come down to Menokin now.
Okay, very, very cool. Have you, I saw them on the website, the majority of the feedback was very positive. Have you gotten like purists who are like up in arms about this?
Well, I can speak to that. Because I've been here a little bit longer. When we first decided to go with the Glass House project, probably every person who walked through the door was like, I can't believe you're doing this. Why would you do this to this building? Right. But I always like to say also that I don't think anybody left without going, wow, I get it. That's really great. So that became sort of our goal, was like, hey, well, how do we get people here so they can,
Right.
you know, we'll support it and get what we're doing, because it is a really special kind of way of interpreting the past here.
Yes.
So
Yeah, I think to add to that, you know, I think there's always going to be things controversial when you're kind of pressing the edges of what these new industries are, and I think that certainly does that, and I think you'll continue to foster debate on what historic preservation means and what we're doing with it. So I you know, we welcome the conversation. I think it's all relevant, and but I think for the most part, as Alice said, people, when they arrive and get there and see what we're doing and why we're doing it, there's mostly buy-in for at that point.
Yeah, that I think that's important. And I think telling the story and the why helps win people over. I'm not everybody, because I think there's like 5% of the population that wants to complain all the time. But so I just made that percentage up. I don't know.
Where's the scientific models on that?
So tell me about how you're telling the stories of the enslaved people that worked there, and also the native people that lived there before the colonialization period.
So a lot of this is just kind of evolving right now. We began with, we had some research done about what we knew from like in inventories and censuses from earlier days, and we had that sort of noted. And you know, that's on our website also. But we were hearing stories that from local locals who lived in the region, that they thought that they were connected to the property. They were enslaved descendants or something like that, because Frank and Becky never had any children, so they didn't have any descendants. The property went through a lot of different people who stayed there, but didn't stay very long, until the last family, which was the Harwood family, and they were there for probably the longest time, like 30 or 40 years. And so we initiated an advisory work group to start doing, figure out what we needed to know, and to get, and we do this a lot in the way we practice. We bring in scholars, and we bring in people in the field to help direct where we're going to go with a new project. And so we began collecting stories and doing a little research and genealogy. We got some support from the Virginia Humanities and from the Collis Warner Foundation to get researchers building this work. And it has sort of exploded for us since we've done that. It's been really exciting. We have a full-time research assistant now to help build these stories. And so there were lots of things that were feeding into this, though. We did some community conversations where we had something called the Sleepover Conference, where historic preservation, architectural preservationists like Frank Van Yoon and Joseph McGill, who both have these different things, different projects that they do where they call attention to historic buildings. So they did a sleepover at Menokin, and
they came to Lancaster, and I went to the one that they did in Lancaster.
Well, the funny thing for us is we didn't have a house, you know. But we did this big outdoor program. But we had a firelit dinner with an historic interpreter, and we talked about the stories of what it meant to be here, and everybody slept in tents. And then we regrouped and had a reflection the next day, and it was really meaningful, and it started the conversation about where to go. And we also we worked with university students to explore how we could do some kind of interpretation, but the committee directed us towards the cabins. So we have this archaeological site that has the footprints of where there were former cabins, and that had been excavated and then refilled in, which you do if you're not doing anything else with the site.
Right.
And so we hadn't been doing any further interpretation on it since that time. So what we did was we decided to build a cabin, but not just build another cabin like they have at Montpelier or something like that, because we didn't actually know exactly what this building looked like. So based on historic models of the Tidewater region and of the type of cabin that would have been on a site like that, we built a framework of it, which they call a ghost structure in architectural terms. And that was built doing a historic trades workshop, which is part of what way we try and do our interpretation, is talking about how things are made and actually doing that. And so we did, and then with that, it's enclosed in this translucent fabric. So now we have this place to have this conversation. And that's the beginning of most of our tours, starts right around there. And we're using that space further to use that to be now a place to do, to interpret it in multiple ways, like through maybe video projection or an artist installation. We're building on an artist residency, working with other groups to tell our stories. And it creates a gathering place too. So we have a small fire pit there. We can have conversations in the evening. The place is illuminated at night, so it's really striking on the landscape.
Oh, yeah.
So there's all these levels of things that we're doing with that as we sort of are building on that. And then along with that, so we have this whole kind of we've built this kind of maker concept. We're interested in the building workshops. We do a maker's day where we bring kids out. We have our own little brickyard that we've built now. We're starting to collect and build bricks. And we hope to expand on that into other historic trades. We have the space to do things, it just all takes time and money over a little while, but we're getting there. And I think we're following the right path, and people are really interested in our new program, except for thanks to this year, have really been expanding a lot. And people are coming out because that's what they want to do, and that's what they want to know about, and that's what they want to participate in.
Have you shifted most of your programming to virtual then for this year?
So we have things like this. We're doing a couple webinars. We actually have one tomorrow night on an author who's doing wrote a novel called Caring Independence, about the gentleman who had to go collect the last signers' signatures for the Declaration of Independence, who couldn't actually come to Philadelphia.
Right.
So it's a really great story. And, we are Steiner. We have a Steiner's building. So everything relates to different things. We did a Menokin webinar about the history of the architecture of the building and its development. And we're doing, we're participating in a genealogical conference talking about the descendant communities that we have been uncovering too. So there's different ways that we're reaching that. And I'm building on some things for the classroom, although the classrooms are kind of have a lot going on right now. So we're not doing that much with them yet.
Yes. So, and I guess that kind of goes into my next question. And so I know that on the website, you have a lot of different programs, some for like being outside, like the kayaks, and then you have different educational programs. So can you tell me a little bit about some of the other things that you have at the site?
Well, because part of what we do is we are preserving this architectural land here, right? The site and the land, which is part of what is like a cultural landscape. So that includes the whole grounds and what's around it. And if you walk the grounds, there's lots more to learn about the site beyond just the buildings. Right. One of those happens to be, we have some tobacco rolling roads that we're on there that we lead a trail that goes down along, and we go down to, you can follow the trails go down to a place called Menokin Bay, which is the widest part of this creek, which used to have the barges come up and down from it. And along that, there's also rich history of Indian sites that used to be there. Across the creek from us is a place called Dancing Point, and there's other things like that nearby. And just embedded in the landscape. So we're building our trail system for that. And then part of that also comes to, we have this landscape tour, which we do now. And we talk about the different places and where you are physically, but also, we're looking towards building sort of a waterscape tour too, because we have kayaking. You can go out there and learn a little bit more about the places that surround this. I mean, because that's how people used to get around. They'd get around by water a lot of times, especially when you live in a peninsula.
Yes. Yeah. Yes. Very much. Very good. Oops. The Zoom was talking to me. It threw me off a little bit. So tell me a little bit about the challenges and trends that you see in preservation.
Sure. I can start on that a little bit. I think that the challenges today is certainly relevance. You hear the conversation about relevance everywhere you go when it comes to historic preservation, museums, history, cultural sites. Staying relevant with changing attitudes, environmental, social issues, social trends. People want to be moved and engaged in things they're talking about in their own living rooms and their kitchens. And I think history sites, cultural sites, all have the opportunity to be able to do that. And I think thinking outside the box needs to be a certainly something that historic sites, preservation sites need to be doing more and more. And that's where we really see ourselves right now is certainly this glass house concept is certainly thinking outside the box in a way, but we're hitting certain things. I think trying to evoke emotional connection to history is something that is a way to stay relevant with people. Sites that tend to do that could be not always the easiest subjects. It could be difficult subjects to evoke emotion, evoke those feelings of grounding with social concepts today are the important sites. I think the traditional model of museum historic houses, walking along the carpet, staying behind the velvet rope, talking about furniture is not doing it these days. So finding other ways to engage the community is the best way to, connecting with the community around you. That's another big thing, is ways to be able to communicate what you are and who you are and how you're part of that community. So we're trying to do that at Menokin and everything we're doing. Menokin, we use this phrase dynamic preservation now. So anything that's able to be kind of creating a preservation treatment to really focus in on what those conversations and social issues are. Things can be dynamic and changeable. For instance, what Alice talked about with the remembrance structure, where the former slave cabin was located, it's a movable conversation place. It evokes emotion, it evokes conversation on social issues around race in today in our country today. So there's ways to do that, and I think historic preservation sites, cultural sites that can do that more or do it more effectively are in the lead in pushing the edges of what preservation can be as we move into the future.
I agree, and I think too that people that have typically not been included in telling the story of these historic sites feel more connected to history when they realize that their story is part of the whole story too.
You had a long time where those stories were not being told. And we still have a lot of work. It's not like that the information was not out there. And you hear that a lot. It's like, oh, well, there's no primary source resource. No, that there's rich histories that are out there.
You just have to look a little bit.
You have to look a little bit and bring those out. And really it all connects in, to our very rich, diverse history that America, or really all of our world is. And so bringing that to attention is certainly something that historic sites should be doing. Talking about present day issues, that's what people are talking about. Being there for that, being there as a place where we can have that dialogue and that connection is really going to help cement the importance of those sites to the community around them.
Yeah, I agree. Did you have anything you wanted to share, Alice? Or that you were thinking about?
No, I think he's doing a good job covering all that.
Well, he let you take the lead on some, so I think you're good. I think you're pretty balanced. So, is there something that either one of you wanted to share that maybe I forgot to ask you about, or that you thought about as we were talking?
Yeah, one more. We talked a little bit about the importance of the history of the enslaved on our property. At our property that we're really just caretakers of, and we didn't really hit on, and which I know is part of the question, is the importance of the Rappahannock Indian to that area. And it's what Menokin is named after. It's a Rappahannock word. They are still in the area, in the community today. They're still very much a part of what we do. We've taken this model of working with a work group to really help us when it comes to interpreting slavery at our site and working on descendant community and really having them be part of our board as well. We really like to take the same model when it comes to the Rappahannock as well. And I think that's important for all historic sites, cultural sites to do, is just to really bring the descendants of the people that were there into the conversation of what you want to be. And really it's and that's the same model we hope to do with the Rappahannock. A lot of our attention right now is on the house because it's deteriorated. You have to. And so that conversation naturally leads into the enslaved who built it and that community right now. We hope to get more to the cultural landscape. We have 500 acres at Menokin, so that they Rappahannock will be very important in the way we interpret that history moving forward.
Yeah, definitely. And I think having them on the board is important, because if you have a seat at the table, you can kind of influence that discussion.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So tell me, how can someone support the project, the foundation?
Come visit us. That's always the first thing I say. And you can visit us both in person, and that's what's great about, we were able to stay open for most of this pandemic. We are obviously we have a visitor center that's been closed, but we have 500 acres of landscape, and so it was much easier to get out. Yes, to social distance and be out at our site. And we have that active construction going on that you can see that preservation in action. So that's always, but you can visit us virtually as well. Our website, you can www.menokin.org. You can visit. We have a new website coming in about a month. So if you're listening to this in October, that will probably be already launched by that point in time. So you can visit us there as well. And obviously you can support our project both in your visitation, but also telling people about it, really the word of mouth right now. And of course, your gifts are important to be able to support the work that that we're doing at Menokin. We're fully supported on individual giving. And so that's important to note when we talk to people, that we're reliant on the generosity and the support and enthusiasm of people that think that this is an important part of our community.
Yes, very, very good. And how can someone contact you? Should they go to the website? Is that the best way?
They can go to menokin.org, or we have phones. We have an easy phone number. It's 804-333-1776. or
Facebook, social media, Instagram, Twitter. We're involved and very active on all the above. So follow us on there as well.
Okay, very good. Well, I will make sure all of those are listed on our website where this gets hosted. And if you thank you so much for coming on with me today. I really enjoyed it, and I learned a lot, and I want to make a weekend trip down to see you.
Good. Well, let us know when you're coming.
I will. Thank you.
Thank you.
Right. Thank you.
Thanks for listening to the Practical Preservation Podcast. The resources discussed during this episode are on our website at practicalpreservationservices.com/podcast. If you received value from this episode and know someone else that will get value from it as well, please share it with them. Join us next week for another episode of the Practical Preservation Podcast. For more information on restoring your historic home, visit practicalpreservationservices.com.